Thanks all so much for coming to our discussion today about bridging the gap between Africa and Hollywood. I'm sure it's going to prove to be a lively and interesting conversation. So by way of introduction, my name is Anthony Kimball, and I'm the CEO of Arrested Industries and a producer and partner at 5X Media based in Los Angeles. However, I was born in Zimbabwe and grew up in South Africa, and I'm truly passionate about bringing both African talent and African stories and narratives to the global stage. In fact, my two main creative collaborators are based right here in the beautiful city of Cape Town. And I'm currently optioning the rights to 2 local TV series for adaptation in the UK and the US. So it seems that finally the international world is opening up to the huge talent base and entertainment market in Africa. But sadly, outside of the Black Panthers and Wakanda Forevers, African narratives have historically struggled to break through on the global stage. So in our discussion today, we're going to focus on highlighting some of Africa's unique narratives, gaining global recognition, the collaborative efforts to foster cross-cultural storytelling, and the burgeoning opportunities for African talent in the international industry. Personally, I think it's a super exciting time for Africa, with huge celebrities all looking to the continent for inspiration. Idris Elba just announced his partnership with Mo Abudu and Ebony Life in Nigeria. Trevor Noah recently mentioned that he was coming back to South Africa to do much more work here. And the great Steve Harvey is here at MIP Africa this week, talking and promoting about his new venture, Botswana Ignite. So then, in terms of bridging the gap between Africa and Hollywood, I'm super excited to say we have an amazing panel of incredibly accomplished execs here today, all of whom share my passion for African talent and African narratives. So I'd just like to take a very quick beat and introduce everyone, and then we'll dive straight into the conversation. So first up on the far left, we've got Billy Dundee. So Billy is the CEO of African Entertainment Distributors, which since 2014 acquired and distributed over 300 shows across the African continent. He has produced and sold 50 stand-up comedy shows, including a 13-part special, Trevor Noah Presents Nation Wild, and a 6-part Netflix stand-up comedy special, Only Jokes Allowed, and the TV movie A Royal Surprise, which premiered on the USA Network. Next up, we have the wonderful Jamila Hunter. Jamila is president of Macro TV Studios, also based in Los Angeles. One of the most accomplished execs in Hollywood, previously the EVP of Programming and Development at Freeform, which was Disney's Millennial and Gen Z television network, and now president of Charles D. King's company, Macro Television Studios, which is a multi-platform media company that represents the voices and perspectives of Black people and persons of color. Then we've got Narendra Reddy, COO of the Africa Channel, a media company focused on presenting Pan-African and diaspora content to a global audience. He's responsible for providing strategic direction for production, programming, acquisitions at the network, including the development and production of original pilots and series domestically in the States and in Africa. And then last but not least, the wonderful Siobhan O'Shaughnessy, who's co-founder and president of American Cinema Inspires. So Siobhan began her career as the president of international sales at PM Entertainment, during which time she produced and sold over 176 feature films and 2 successful TV series, and now runs ACI, which prioritizes family-friendly content that has been produced for domestic networks like Hallmark, UpTV, Lifetime, and PureFlix. And then, sadly, we have lost one of our panelists, Luti Fagbenle, who has been delayed on a flight somewhere between, I don't know exactly where, but he sends his apologies. So you've got the 4 of us, though. So with that introductions out of the way, I'd love to sort of kick off the conversation and just briefly start talking about development within the African context. So as we know, Africa is a huge and prolific producer of film and television. Nollywood alone produces 2,500 films every single year, But despite the volume and diversity of content, Africa hasn't kept up pace with many of the developing and emerging countries like Korea, Turkey, Spain, or Israel. So with this in mind, I'd love to address the first question to Jamila, if that's okay. As Macro TV Studios looks to build its development slate, what are buyers looking for in the US with regards to African-themed content? And, and what are the obstacles or requirements to get African-themed projects sold?
I'm sorry if you guys heard me say, oh no, I didn't mean that. I just didn't think I would be first. So I was like, oh no. But really excited to be here. As you mentioned, I joined Macro in January, and one of the things I was the most excited about is the studio's goal of broadening our business in both theatrical as well as television in terms of the continent of Africa. And on our film side, we have co-productions already that we're going with different parts of the country. And I think what's been unique, I've only been there 6 months, but in our conversations with different networks and buyers, they're definitely looking for things that feel like there are some parallels to life in the States.
Yeah.
So the specificity of what's going on in the culture and in the continent here, but ways in which there are parallels that can be drawn to experiences or things that are going on in the US, whether that's past or present. There's a project that we're developing right now for this channel FX that is set in the 1960s. 90% of the story is set in Ghana, and it's a story of 2 Americans that come to Ghana and are on the run, but also looking to Ghana as a place for escape from the political climate of the US, which very much is a parallel to what's going on today with the United States.
Absolutely.
So there are things like that that we've seen with buyers who are very much wanting the specificity of story and continent and culture, but the ability to find parallels with contemporary stories going on are things that we have found so far.
So would you say it's essential then to have American characters, experiencing African life?
I don't know
Or
that I
not
would
so
say
much?
there have to be American characters. And again, others here who've been doing the content longer than I have, but I do think there should be some resonance. Obviously, there's been successful dramas already that are set on the continent that don't necessarily have American characters in it, but I do think people want to feel as if there's relatability in terms of the characters and storylines.
Absolutely.
We did one film already here in South Africa, and it was during COVID. And what we did is we kind of took a fish out of water. So an American came to South Africa.
Got it. Was that a royal surprise?
Yeah, a royal surprise.
Yeah.
And it was it helped the American people to see the country, see the beautiness of it all. The actors were absolutely amazing from South Africa. So everybody was South African, except for the one American actor that we took down there.
Uh-huh.
So everything else was South African. Then we ended up selling that to BET, and then BET loved the whole concept of it. But in the beginning, BET was kind of like, it's South African, you know? But because it was a royal family, they kind of thought, oh, they sound English. So they kind of let it go. So then they wanted the fish out of water to be the opposite side. So those same South African actors that were in the first one came from South Africa to the United States.
Got it.
So we brought 3 African actors plus the female director that we had, which was fantastic.
Amazing.
She came to the United States, and we shot them all in Kentucky. So it was a back and forth.
Yeah.
And now BET's talking, we come back again to South Africa for a wedding. So it's starting slowly with a trilogy, of bringing the culture in. And at the same time, we also, for ourselves, for our distribution arm, we do acquire a lot of African commercial projects that are more, I wouldn't say religious, but clean content, romance, comedies that we can put through our platforms in the United States. So those are the things that we're looking for. But they can be South African too.
Great. Yeah, because I just think it's interesting because obviously having grown up in Africa and now living in the United States, I think the lived experience of people in the U.S., black people in the U.S. to sort of indigenous black people in South Africa is of course a completely different experience. So it's interesting to see how you're melding the two and being able to sort of create content that will actually resonate with a global audience and a local audience, which is really, really important in today's, economic climate, I think.
Exactly.
To get shows that will travel. Great. So that kind of then brings us on to the next topic that I wanted to discuss, which was authenticity, sort of local content versus accessibility, which basically shows that will resonate with the global audience. So MultiChoice, Canal Plus, Netflix, and Amazon, even though very briefly, they all opted for very hyper-local development for the African market. Both with regards to narratives and talent, with the global audience being very much an afterthought. So I'm wondering what people think about this approach and whether or not you feel that has helped or hindered, the growth of African content on the global stage. So that was originally going to be a question for Luti, because I know he was, developing a slate of content that both speaks to the Black British diaspora in the UK, as well as African content. But Narendra, would you like to jump in and maybe take that one?
I can provide some perspectives. I'm sure the others have as well. I mean, clearly, some of the companies that you're talking about, when they have been developing shows, the principal market for them has been Africa.
Yeah.
So it has to work here because, in the case of Netflix, it's trying to get additional subscribers, and when Amazon was around, it's the same thing. I think from the perspective of our conversation about how do we make content travel to other countries or to outside of the continent, I think it's important to really keep in perspective as to what are buyers seeking. They can't be an afterthought.
Yeah.
Right? So in the case of many of the players here, it has to first work in the local market before they take it overseas. In the way we develop shows, that's not a criterion.
Yeah.
It first has to, the size of the budget of the show has to be commensurate with the market you're seeking. So if you want a higher budget, you can't make a show that's specific to just Namibia, for example.
No, exactly.
Right? If you're going to, it either has to cross over borders within the continent, or it has to resonate in the UK or in the US.
Yeah.
So in our slate of development at the Africa Channel, we have most of the productions that we have in development have been seeking to do that, because it continues to perplex me why content from South Korea and Turkey and Israel and Spain are all finding their face on the global stage, yet 54 countries with rich cultures and rich stories don't, there's some marginal, Reka and Blood and Water and all have some marginal success, but not anywhere near the success of Money Heist or
Squid
Fauda
Game or Squid Game. Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, that was actually one of my next questions. So, but
and I think some of it has
raising
to do with the development process, because too often you can't expect creators who have largely been creating for a local economy to suddenly be given money and thrown into the deep end of the pool and expect it's setting up people for failure.
Failure, for sure.
So one of the things we have, the measured way that we have approached this is collaboration. Making sure that experienced producers are working with creators on the continent to elevate their game onto the global space, and really finding a point of view that resonates with whichever market you're building. It's something that Jamila was talking about. It's not necessarily American characters, but having the best example I can use for a culturally relevant show from Africa that is currently, or maybe has just closed on the US television networks, is Bob Loves Abishola.
Yeah.
It's a very specific to African heritage, but it is fully resonates with American audiences, and it's this 5th season, I believe, on CBS.
Yeah, no, it's fascinating. So, I mean, I guess one of the key issues that I think faces the local market is financing and economic incentives and funding. So it's the eternal conundrum for us producers, finding enough money to finance our shows. And so we know that many governments offer tax benefits for companies to film in their locations. South Africa, however, is pretty much the only African country to offer a tax rebate, as we know, although I think Ghana has just announced a 20% tax rebate earlier in the year. But we know in recent years the rebate has been really problematic, and the cap has been reduced from 50 million to 25 million rand, which is $1 million, Jamila, which doesn't go far, as you know. So besides tax incentives and rebates then, what additional steps can be taken by producers who want to develop African-themed content to close funding on their projects? And Siobhan, I know your company, ACI, obviously both acquires content for distribution as well as develops and produces films and TV shows in the genre space. What's been your experience with incentives from the continent, and what are some of the creative ways you go about getting funding for and sales for your African-themed projects?
Well, Billy can even answer because we did it together. Do you want to answer that one?
I think that we produced, we actually, I came from a distribution background and we had to evolve into production. We came from an area where we looked at international content, sourced content that we felt was commercial, and now we're reversing it where we're trying to find commercial content locally that we take internationally. And the one area that we started is let's look at production. We couldn't find the content we wanted for South Africa, so Siobhan and myself spoke, and we said, let's just start, let's make our first one. And we, it was what you would call a hyper low, or
A royal surprise.
a low-cost production during COVID that turned out to be very successful. But the challenging part was not part of the funding, but part of the waterfall is the rebate, which was 35%, and it's been, I think, 2.5 years, and we still haven't got the rebate. And in that time, it has impacted us that we've had to rewrite our other stories for other countries where we have access to the rebate. So it's critical for us to grow our market to get access to that rebate. And it's not, I almost want to say it's not something special having a rebate, because we go to other countries to access that, which becomes our margin on our films. It's not a, it's not part of our funding. It's part of our margin.
But I remember in our discussion previously, you guys, you had intended to shoot a number of your projects here in South Africa, but because of the issues with the rebate, you went, I believe it was to Hungary and
I'm
to
going to
Czechoslovakia.
Hungary, I'm going to Brazil.
Yeah.
Yeah, because, and I had to rewrite the scripts because I had written the scripts for South Africa, and now I'm making the script for Hungary, and now I'm making the script for Brazil. So and we tried calling the DTI and saying, look, we were making these here, and we're still waiting on the one that we did during COVID, even though he says it's 2.5 years, it's almost 3.
Yeah. So, I think tax incentives the world over are problematic.
Yeah.
I have someone...
It's just a funnel of money that you're expecting on it, so you don't want to lose it.
I know, in a lot of the projects that we've been working on, we now look at the DTI rebate more as a pre-sale rather than an actual kind of component of the financing plan, because you can't rely on it for cash flow purposes anymore. So I think that is an issue for everybody working on the continent. And we're hopeful now that, with the new government, it seems that the Department of Culture and Media are going to invest a lot more in the DTI and the rebate. So fingers crossed that makes a difference and will bring more. Because I'm super passionate about bringing more American projects to shoot in South Africa and on the continent. Purely because we have amazing talent here, we have amazing locations. We have, incredible weather and incredible light. But Jamila, I'm not sure what your experience has been, but whenever I talk to Americans coming to South Africa, they're terrified. They think of it as a big, wild country, and there's security issues. They've heard of, infrastructure problems like, rolling blackouts and all that. Has that been your experience in terms of, like, when you said you were coming out to MIP Africa, were people like, are you sure? Is it safe?
No. Look, I say no, but I'm working with people who are, and the people I'm talking with are equally excited about the opportunities on the continent. So
that's good to know. Yeah.
Our partners at FX, who are very excited about the opportunity to shoot in Ghana if that were to go as a series, there's definitely an awareness about the limitations of crew and like what we will need to learn and partner and finding the appropriate partners on the continent. So I'm not being Pollyanna about it, but I do think, costs in the States are ridiculous. Like it's incredibly expensive to shoot things in the U.S. As well as in the UK. And as our industry is going through its own versions of turmoil and upheaval, looking for opportunities for growth in a very saturated market
Yeah.
is something that is, like it's a pasture that has not yet been fully
Explored.
really explored.
Yeah.
So I think there's an awareness that there's a lot we don't know, but that's where I think partnerships and finding partners who are here to be boots on the ground, which is why I was excited to come here. And people I spoke to were like, oh, that's great.
Amazing.
Because we need more of those partnerships. So again, that would be for what I've heard. Not that I'm talking to people that are going, what are you doing there? For sure, there are people whose priorities are going to be the markets that are generating a lot of money right now, right? The ones that are very mature.
Yeah.
But the growth opportunity of Africa is one that there's quite a few people that are very bullish on.
Yeah.
Not,
And
I
sure.
was going to add
Go,
to
Cindy.
that, notwithstanding what the issues that Siobhan's talking about for the DTI rebates, given the topic that we're talking about, I don't think that should be a barrier just because the government doesn't give you a tax rebate. Because if the focus is on elevating content,
Yeah.
we should film here whether we get a rebate or not.
No, exactly. And I mean, if
Right?
you think in the greater scheme of things,
hard when it comes to
$1
money.
million
They cover it.
on a big studio movie is a drop in the ocean. But it's more the sort of independent films.
Right,
that,
and particularly if people are doing things on a budget, but my contention on this, and which I firmly believe, is when we can elevate the level of storytelling and talent, the money will come, and it doesn't have to come from the government.
Yeah,
There's
no,
going to
for
be,
sure.
if it works, for example, it works in the UK, the money is going to come from the UK because the cost of production, as Jamila said, is going to be
Right.
much lower here anyways.
No, 100%. No, 100%.
You know?
And you touched also on talent. So, I mean, most of the major producers focused on African content have said that they intend to direct their work to local African talent in front of and behind the camera, and rightly so. But this reinforces the claim that the lived experience is the single biggest factor ensuring the authenticity of narratives and effective representation in the space. So on the subject of talent then, I'd love to really ask Billy a bit more about his experiences producing comedy specials in South Africa, including Trevor Noah's 6-part Netflix series. So Billy, do you think that comedy travels, and how do African comedians fare on the international stage? So I guess broadly, what's your assessment of local talent gaining traction abroad, and what can we do to promote local stars internationally?
We've got incredible comedy talent. We've got a agency that manages corporate bookings for a whole lot of them, and we book a lot of them for primarily Savannah for a lot of their branded events. So we've got a lot of experience with the comedians, but Trevor is seriously, he does stand out, and we understand why he stands out. You're talking about lived South African experience. You look at his book that he's written. It is a very South African story.
Was that Born a Crime,
yes,
right? Yeah.
that everyone can relate to. I think that, and if you follow how, when we did a tour with him last year, his show would adapt for every city so when we come to Cape Town, his show, it's essentially the same show, but he will make it relatable by changing something small. So he'll say, I bumped into someone at V&A Waterfront. We go to Durban, he'll say, I bumped into someone at Shaka Marine World. And just those small bits, by doing those small bits, he wins the audience over in every territory, every country he goes to. And in fact, when Kevin Hart was with him, Kevin Hart basically said to him, in maybe different words, bugger you, Trevor, because you can travel the world where Kevin can't, because his set is just American.
It's
he
more
can't
focused.
adapt. But Trevor just changes small things, and he just wins people over. And I think that's what we're really good at. And if we can do that more in our films that we are producing, that's our secret that we're trying to get to.
And we do
amazing.
take the best of what you have in South Africa. Even if we can't get the DTI, we're taking them to Hungary. We'll take the actors over there.
Sure.
We'll take the actors in Brazil to still keep it until the things get fixed here. Because I know the things are going to fix with the DTI. It's just taking a little longer than I wanted.
No, exactly. It's taking a little
I
time.
was just mentioning to Narendra yesterday that HBO bought a series called Flat Tires that's set in Cape Town, that's made from local young people from here.
Oh, wow.
They shot something. I'm saying no, but they bought it, and there was a sizzle that was already shot. It's kind of a mockumentary format, and it's definitely specific in terms of Cape Town. And I was watching it going, oh, there's things here that are going to be specific to the city, but I understood it. I knew what was funny about it.
Yeah.
And again, it's in development there, so we'll see if it goes the distance. But I think that just even reflects the openness of buyers to go, oh, let's get content that is featuring young South. Like I was like, this is amazing. HBO does this? That's
I'm really
amazing.
excited to hear that because way back when HBO had a full international team,
Right.
which was disbanded, when Warner Brothers took over and started making all their sweeping cuts. So it's really heartening to hear that they're actually looking at international content again, because I know most of the international team, we had a couple of shows that we were pitching them that we were hopeful that we'd sell, but they kind of, they were kind of all axed unceremoniously. The minute David Zaslav came in and started making all his cuts at the network. But that's.
I was going to add on the subject of talent. I have a slightly sort of unpopular perspective, because there's a lot of the narrative has been we have to go find local talent to tell
Local
African stories, right?
Yeah.
Hers is the example she just raised was stories can come from anywhere.
Yeah.
And it should be not dependent on race, complexion, and anybody should be able to tell any story. The only thing I would say is if you are going to tell a story about something that you're not familiar with, then it behooves you to get the research done effectively. But some of the development that we have on our slate has come from people who are not from Africa.
Right, interesting.
And unfortunately, that doesn't make the most sexy headline to say, oh, we're not working with, local African.
It's
who cares?
representation
At the
in
end
the
of the
Hollywood
day,
right now is crazy. Like everybody has to.
And I often think that could potentially be a barrier, because I am of the belief if we have 2 or 3 shows that make it big on the world stage, Hollywood will come at Africa like lemmings and want 15 of them.
No, it's totally true. We need our Squid Games. So if any of you producers out there can, create a big global hit series from Africa, let us know. We'd like to produce it for you. So I've just been told that we've got 10 minutes left. So I'd love to open up the floor for questions. So if anybody has any specific questions for me or any of the other panel, please feel free to jump in and let us know.
I see a hand.
There's one over here.
Hi, my name is Suchaba, filmmaker. I think I'd just like to ask, bridging a gap is normally an equal kind of relationship, and it feels like the conversation we're having here is kind of top-down, where there's a sense, like what you said, Narendra, that you don't care about using local talent, you just have to use any talent, it's fine, because in your development, you're using anyone. Because a story is a story and anyone can write anything. But it's quite complex, because it's also to deal with economics, it's to deal with representation, it's to deal with where our filmmakers are bridging the gap. So I feel here we're looking at more international players coming to South Africa to take from South Africa. But we don't have that sense. I know we've got a couple of South Africans on the panel, but we don't have the sense of where are our particular filmmakers going and how are they meeting you guys halfway. I don't know if
I can speak briefly to that, because as part of my remit at 5X, which is a talent management studio and talent management company in LA, they've tasked me with actually finding South African and curating African talent that can then travel abroad to work in London or in the States. So I do definitely think it's a two-way street, and people are excited about.
What I'm saying, people on the panel here, it's you guys are looking for us, and we're not necessarily looking for you, and we're not hearing the stories of how our South African filmmakers are bridging the gap. What are their struggles? What's it like to be a South African filmmaker trying to break the Hollywood market? Rather than Hollywood, it's easy for Hollywood to come down to us because we'll be excited to come to, you know what I mean? Because we want to go there.
No, I get
But
it.
what are our stories of the local?
Let me just qualify my comment, I was sort of making a point to just get a conversation going. It is very much our intention to get talent from the continent their space on the world stage. My contention is we have to support them in that activity. You can't just throw them, give them a budget, tell them that you have a... Correct.
Oh, we can't hear you, sorry.
The mindset is we have to support, we have to help. So it comes from a framework of the international world has to help us.
Yeah.
Rather than let's come together and don't help because we can also provide. So I think it's a very sensitive way of framing it of we have to help you and we have to find you guys to take you to the international world. So I think it's a very sensitive way to bridge a gap.
Yeah.
'Cause we want to bridge a gap on equality, but not in the sense of you're coming to help us. You're helping us to increase our openness, our career, etc., etc. So it would have been nice if we had more African filmmakers, like we've got the Mandla Dubes, we've got
Yeah.
Brente, to be here to see how they are bridging the gap as well. Because it's a whole different story.
100%. No, I hear what you're saying. The
Yeah.
last thing we want to do is be saviors to people here. But you have to understand where our company comes from. We speak to the global African diaspora. So when I talk about international talent outside of the continent, I'm talking about Africans who have chosen to emigrate and work in industries in Hollywood, using them as an entry point into developing talent who haven't had the experience to work on the global stage. I'm not talking about the white saviors coming in to save Africa. That is the antithesis of why we exist as a company. But it's a good point you make, and I fully appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
Hi, my name is Nana Bula Bula. I'm a screenwriter, actress, director, and producer, currently finishing my MFA in screenwriting and acting. I wanted to ask, and this is the same question I asked yesterday in that previous talk. A lot of times we feel as if, and also I got that feeling when I was listening, I was like, do we have to mold ourselves to be palatable for the global markets?
Right.
For us to fit in? It's not that we don't want to reach the world or the global, market. It's just that we want to be true to ourselves.
Yeah.
Because what is true and authentic for other countries or other continents is totally different for us.
Yeah.
And then now what happens to creators like me who does want to write about other rich stories? But obviously, when you say for a quote, a lot of times we hear this thing where they say, when you want a higher budget, depending on what your story's target market is. Now, what happens to us as creators? What would you advise for us as creators who want to create hyper-local, not necessarily hyper-local, but rich African stories that will reach the global market? Should we stop trying to go there and maybe just focus on us, or?
I mean, I think, I'll just jump, I think, a beautiful, unbelievable, authentic stories will always break through. I don't know if you're familiar, Michaela Cole, who is a huge, incredible producer and director. She started her career at the Edinburgh Fringe on a tiny stage, probably half the size of this, doing, a one-woman show. And then when she did I May Destroy You, which was a big HBO BBC co-production, Netflix came to her saying we wanted to do it, and they wanted to be very prescriptive about it. And she said no. She said they were offering her tons and tons of money, and she said no. She wanted to make the story that she wanted to make, and because it was such an incredibly powerful, authentic, true story about her lived experience. She did it with HBO and BBC, so she still had a fair amount of money, but at the same time, it became a global phenomenon, and everybody was talking about it. So I think you should always be true to yourself, and whether that means you make a small independent film that's self-financed on your iPhone, then you can do that. But it's difficult when you're dealing with larger financial companies and institutions and studios, because they need to feel that their investment in your project will ultimately recoup the money. So it's a tricky balance. But I'm all for people telling the right.
I'll answer because I have, and I don't know your project. So your project intentionally I don't, but I have taken on 7 or even 9 of the multi-choice series. And I have some of them in Zulu, I have some of them in Xhosa, and I put them on. I really wanting for the market, I put it on all the platforms, it's on Freevee, it's on Tubi, it's on YouTube, it's on all of them. And they're just not making money. You know, so now we're even thinking of maybe putting them in English to see if there's some way
Would you dub them
into
yeah.
English to see if we can create a market. So I'm not trying to tell you not to do your story, but as long as you know it could be limited to just here, and then we come up with a way of how we can make it travel.
Yeah.
Well, because there's so much product out there. Let me just tell you, it's not just the United States. England has a whole bunch of products. Spain has a whole bunch of products.
Australia.
Italy has. You got so much. Japan, Korea, Chinese. We're all competing for markets. Is just figuring out a way to get to that person to watch it. Because just like everybody else, you're streaming. You're going, what's going to make it different that that person's going to look at it?
Yeah. Billy,
Yeah,
sorry.
I just wanted to add, and I think that's where we came from on the production side. We said, you know, in the American market, they have every year they have all these rom-coms. Every Christmas they have all these Christmas movies. Let us get in on that market with our South African story in a way.
In a way.
And so we told a kind of, it was a romance, but
It was
based
royal.
in South Africa.
Every girl wants to become a royal princess. You know, it was a typical. I mean, it wasn't a South African story. It was a typical general story that everybody could relate to. So that's what we used, and we used South Africa as a backdrop to start introducing South Africa and then South African actors. So there's different ways of making that market get told.
And I can say, from that initial discussion we had, the broadcaster that we spoke to said on the top of their list that they shared before, it said no foreign accents.
Yes.
Was the number one on the list. And I said, why are we, how come our film is an exception? And they said it's because we created
The royalty.
a context of why that American came to South Africa and why it became a South African story. In our second film that we made in the States, where we took the 3 actors that was, and paired them off against 3 Americans, the feedback that we got was so much stronger because they loved the clash of cultures between the Americans and the South Africans. And we had a bit of a breakthrough. And we're moving to the next film that we're going to move back to South Africa, but then the writer's strike put a block to that. But in a slow way, we're trying to build that, bringing the South African stories into the American, but through their normal films that they're making.
We're trying to think outside the box. I mean, we're independent. I wish I could say I'm a studio. I'm not a studio. I don't have millions and millions of dollars. But I know there is a voice of y'all's product, and we just have to think outside the box and doing something a little different. You know, coming up with little creative ways that are financially feasible to get it more out to the other people.
No, absolutely.
And
Okay.
I feel so compelled to say this. Your voice and your story is your gift.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you do not stop. There's
Exactly.
no version of
100%.
anyone sitting here who's going to say, don't tell the story you're compelled to tell. I do think what you're hearing from everyone here is that being strategic, you know, being smart, doing research, and I see the internet as sort of the great democratizer of our industry.
Yeah.
100%.
That the opportunity, and I'm not saying it's easy, but to your point about shooting something on a phone or having something that's short even.
Yeah.
When I mentioned flat tires, they shot something. So it was something that could be sent on a link and passed forward, using to your advantage social media and young people and the way that things spread. That's how you can build your own sense of, wait, people are looking for this and want to see it. It doesn't have to be wait for the big distributors.
Yes.
They come to you once they see that there's a demand.
100%.
And that's where I think young people, like, you know, who are being innovative about their content and taking a little bit of it but showing buzz, those are ways that you can build your own opportunity without waiting for someone. Does that make sense?
Absolutely.
One of the things that we're doing as a company is to address some of this because, you know, we feel like there's so much of African content that can actually resonate with global audiences. The problem is when you have these big streamers and broadcasters that are trying to be all things to all people, even if they buy an African show, it's going to be buried.
Yeah.
Because in the local market, they're going to, in the UK, they're going to promote The Crown, not Blood and Water.
Yeah.
Right? Netflix is. Because that's what's going to resonate there. So for us, the decision we made is we know there are over 200 million plus people of the African diaspora, people who are connected to the continent either from having been born here or having a connection through their heritage. So we said, how do we reach them? And technology now, because of where we are, allows us to, so what we're trying to do is build a distribution platform that reaches that audience so that we don't have to go beg somebody to carry a show that we know would resonate with ours. This is a dream of ours. We're still not there, but that's the aspiration, so that we are opening another market for content creators that can tell authentic stories and have a bigger audience outside of the continent.
Great. Oh, we have one more over there.
Can't hear you.
Is it? Oh, okay, there we go. Hi, I'm Kirsten. Thank you for your time and your energy, and thank you for sharing your knowledge. I work as a development manager at Gambit Films, and my question would be for independent filmmakers who possibly have a Squid Games or Money Heist. How do they get your attention? Would they need attachments in our local country? Would they need to partner up with a film company here that's already successful? Or can they get your attention, can we get your attention as independent filmmakers with a good pitch deck, a good pilot, or a good meeting? How do they get your attention?
I mean, I think
deep
it's very
side.
different. I mean, and I know in the US, because I work a lot in the US, there's a lot of legal ramifications. You have to have an agent, you have to have a lawyer, because otherwise, people can get sued for breach, for piracy and copyright and all of that kind of stuff. I think in the UK and in Europe, things are a little bit easier. And then certainly in South Africa, I know, people are very willing to accept unsolicited pitches. But I know, I'm sure, Jamila, at Macro, you would probably need an agent, or you would need an established production company.
Yeah, I mean, to your point, just again, legally, because people get so litigious about ideas, especially if it's something that's, just a pitch deck or an idea, that typically we are only hearing pitches. Even if it's not an agent, it's coming through like an established producer or studio, more than we're just hearing freeball pitches, unfortunately. But I sounds like you were going to say you have.
I said you can send it to me. I take 5 pages. 5 pages, and I'll tell you if it's something that works for me or it doesn't work for me.
Great.
And if it doesn't work for me, I might be able to direct you on who it might be. I'm very, very contained in what I'm doing, but other people have different ways, and I know all the distributors because that's what I do, and I'll direct you on who will be able to direct you on it.
Great, thanks, Siobhan. That's really helpful. Any last questions? One more? Oh, hi.
I am a young student and I'm studying film, and I just want to ask, in terms of the category that wins foreign films, like Best Foreign Film, why is it that it seems to be always a sort of more Western narrative that gets opportunities, and why is it that African films and more non-Western films have to seem to compromise their narrative? And what if we don't want to make a Squid Games? Do we have any prospect of making these films that really gain traction as narratives that don't have to compromise to be relatable? Because Italian filmmakers, they've been noticed as, one of the greats, like Fellini or whatever it is. They never had to compromise their Italian authenticity and their identities. And the German films that win, they are very German, and they don't ever cast an eye to what will resonate with Americans. So what will you advise as a young generation of South African filmmakers that don't necessarily see America as the goal?
What I would recommend,
It's a very good question.
Know how to find your group. You have to, whatever you want to create, find how that client's going to see it. And I'll tell you, even when I'm in the United States, I'm an American, I went to Hallmark, and I went to Hallmark, I had made 150 films. And I thought, they're gonna listen to me and they're gonna talk to me. I made 150 films. I'm not just a young kid here. And you know what, they looked at me and they go, Siobhan, what are you bringing to me? And I said, what do you mean what I'm bringing to you? I'm bringing you a script. I have 150 films behind me. I'm giving you something here. I have a lot of people like you, Siobhan. What are you bringing to me? And I mean, what do you mean by that? She goes, how are you bringing me new clients? How are you bringing me new viewership? So I had to sit down back and think to myself, okay, I'm just a producer. I'm just a writer. I mean, I don't know. To be able to go back, and again, we all have our blocks, no matter what it is. It's not that it's United States or any other country. Every country, you have to find how you're going to get viewers to your show. So I found books that had 8 million followers, you know. So I had to create that audience to know how the people are going to come to me so that I could go back to Hallmark. And they still said no. Like that, they still said no to me. But it's you as the writer and the creator, you have to think, how am I going to get those followers? And you can create that anywhere in the world.
Yeah, I don't think you should
You know what I'm
compromise.
saying?
Yeah, I don't think you should compromise. I mean, I know, like, Wanuri Kahui's award-winning Kenyan love story won 16 awards on the international film circuit, and there's been a huge buzz around African films and African filmmakers in the last decade. So I would just continue to make the shows that resonate with you emotionally, and you know, that if the story is good and your vision is amazing, you'll win those awards. People will take notice.
I completely agree with you, especially as a young student. Your question is a very good one, by the way. As a young student, don't compromise, and what Jamila, just building on what Jamila said, don't compromise your integrity of your art. There is a time for commerce, and there's a time for you to develop your voice. We'll first develop the voice, then we'll worry about the commerce later. Because if you start getting immediately as a student learning how to be commercial, you're going to lose your voice, and then you've lost everything.
Yeah, I mean, I was just in Edinburgh, the Edinburgh Festival a couple of weeks ago, the Fringe, and I was just blown away by the amazing talent that was on display. These, one man, one woman shows, all pouring their hearts out, for making no money, desperately flyering outside their venues, getting people to come in and see them. And, that's where Phoebe Waller-Bridge was discovered, and then Fleabag was, and that's where Richard Gadd was discovered with The Baby Reindeer, which is now a global phenomenal success on Netflix. So what I would say is just tell your story and be passionate about it. And if it's good, people will find you. We've just signed someone from the Edinburgh Fringe for representation in America. He's a 21-year-old. He did this amazing queer coming of age that brought me to tears, got a standing ovation in this tiny little venue and at the Underbelly Fringe. And we're going to hopefully take him and work with him on fashioning his next big creative career moves, but in the UK and in the US. So just go for it, and the good stuff will always rise to the surface. Are we done?
We're done. We're done.
Okay, so I'm being told we have to wrap up, but thank you so much for being such an engaged and interesting audience, and thanks so much to all the amazing panelists for your time. We really appreciate it.